Vladimir Putin has absolutely dropped the hammer on this US-led peace plan drama. Numerous iterations of this peace plan, the leaks coming out of the Trump administration of the document itself. Zelensky in Ukraine saying, oh, we shaved off points of it. Trump saying, no, we're not going to even meet with Ukraine right now. We're going to send Witkoff to Russia. And then leaks of a phone call that Witkoff had with his counterpart Yuri Ushakov of Russia that is supposed to smear the Trump administration as being agents of Russia and working for Russia. Well, Vladimir Putin has come to clarify things for those in the collective West and the United States who may be confused about where exactly this peace plan stands from the Russian perspective.
There was a list of issues to be discussed and to be deliberated and worked out. As I've already said, before my visit to Alaska, we discussed this with the United States and negotiating team, and after that, the list of possible items for an agreement was drafted, and it was conveyed to us through certain channels. Then there were talks in Geneva between the United States and the Ukrainian delegation. As I understand, they decided between themselves that 28 items should be divided into 4 groups, and we received the outcomes of those discussions. In general, we agree that this may become the basis for a future agreement. It would not be proper for me to make any final statements right now because there is no finalized material so far.
Putin kept dropping bombs on this peace plan, and he says exactly how the Ukraine conflict is going to end, exactly what peace is going to look like at this press conference.
We still have proposals coming in about hostilities. When the Ukrainian troops leave the areas that they're now occupying, then the hostilities will cease. And if they don't, we will make them.
If Ukraine doesn't leave those territories, we will make them. There's not going to be negotiations. There's not going to be, we're going to shave off some of those points that the Trump administration wrote down for Ukraine on a napkin and said, take this, Ukraine. No. If Russia, those territories that have been federalized, that have been essentially voted into Russia, like Zaporozhye, for example, they're still occupied, Russia's going to deoccupy them, demilitarize them, denazify them. The aims haven't changed, and Russia has not negotiated away anything out of this plan. So Vladimir Putin has essentially said, this is not even a peace plan at all. If the U.S. wants to come to Russia, which it will, to talk about them, then Russia will talk about them. And that is all. That is what being in the winning position looks like. The U.S. Army Secretary warning that Ukraine is imminently at the point of defeat, facing imminent defeat while pushing this peace plan. In a meeting with Ukrainian officials, U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll delivered a grim assessment that the troops in Ukraine face a dire situation on the battlefield and would suffer an imminent defeat against Russian sources. 2 sources with knowledge of the matter told NBC News. The Russians were ramping up the scale and pace of their aerial attacks, and they had the ability to fight on indefinitely, said Driscoll. The situation for Ukraine would only get worse over time, and it was better to negotiate a peace settlement now rather than end up in a weaker position in the future. There was more bad news. The U.S. delegation also said America's defense industry could not keep supplying Ukraine with the weapons and air defenses at the rate needed to protect the country's infrastructure and population. Wow. Does that sound familiar, everybody? It sounds like what we've been talking about on this channel for several years, where this was all going to go. Literally, the U.S. Army Secretary is consulting about this peace plan because he is saying Ukraine better give up now. And if it doesn't give up now, then here's what's going to happen. Its army will be destroyed. It's going to lose. And it's only going to get worse on all fronts. What we've been saying here is being confirmed literally by the U.S. military brass inside of Washington, which explains why the Trump administration suddenly released this peace plan and said, we're working now for peace again. And it's no mystery why that happened, because Driscoll said the battlefield situation is in complete shambles for Ukraine. And what happened recently? Pokrovsk fell to Russia. And now Ukraine is in a complete disaster situation where its most important logistics hub has been completely surrounded and cut off. What else is also happening? This horrific corruption scandal, which is literally bleeding the Ukrainian government dry of what little legitimacy it had left, with not only its own people, but the world. The world looks at what has happened to the Ukrainian government, and more comes to the conclusion this is just a shill of the worst machinations of the warmongering class lying and residing in the West. There were major leaks of a transcript of a Steve Witkoff call, which shows so-called, this is the New York Times, deference to Russia. The White House envoy's conversation suggests that President Trump is determined to make a deal to end the war in Ukraine, even if it's mostly on Russia's terms. Now, the Western mainstream media has been saying this over and over and over again in many different publications. Let's be quite honest. This war is going to end on Russia's terms. Why would Russia accept a deal that's not on its terms when Driscoll himself says Russia is winning? Last month, White House envoy Steve Witkoff had encouraging words for Vladimir Putin's senior aide. Witkoff said in a leak call, "We will give in a leaked phone call will give me a lot of space and discretion to get a deal." The transcript published by Bloomberg touched off a fury in Washington because it showed Witkoff appearing to coach the Kremlin on how to negotiate with Trump and undermine an upcoming visit by Zelensky of Ukraine. It also laid bare something else: Trump's stubborn determination to make some kind of deal with Russia to end the war in Ukraine, even if it's mostly on Russia's terms. Along the way, Trump has stoked rare dissent in Congress by Republicans, shocked European allies, and left many Ukrainians feeling abandoned by the United States. "I'm not a massive fan of the president on a lot of things," said Emma Ashford, who's, of course, a think tankistan scholar. "I think it's actually to his credit that he keeps trying to get a peace deal." As early as April, Trump was starting to walk away, trying to end the war in Ukraine. And yet, despite showing his frustration with both Putin and Zelensky, he kept coming back to see a Ukraine peace deal come about, spurred on by a mix of motives. So this is what's going on. There's major leaks coming out, and we have to ask ourselves, well, who's doing the leaking? It's ridiculous. And The Guardian asked this question. The Guardian had a report on this. Who leaked Witkoff's call advising the Kremlin on how to get Trump on their side? Bloomberg published this extraordinary transcript of secret discussions, but their provenance remains unclear. The scoop by Bloomberg showing how Trump aide Steve Witkoff coached the Kremlin on the best way to get Trump's good graces is extraordinary in what it tells us about Witkoff's dubious loyalties and the Kremlin's potential influence over U.S. negotiation efforts. The story covers two intercepted calls, one between Witkoff and Yuri Ushakov, who is a senior aide to Vladimir Putin, and another between Ushakov and Dmitriev, who has been deeply involved in negotiations with Trump White House. Bloomberg's story was published without any byline or dateline, presumably noting the story was written, presumably because noting where the story was written or who wrote it could give clues as to the identity of the source. Bloomberg says only that it reviewed the transcribed audio of two phone calls without giving any hint of the sourcing for that. This is very suspicious, right? This screams intel. It screams intel. Ushakov, who was on both of the calls, appeared to confirm the authenticity of the recordings, saying that he claimed some of it was fake. He would not comment on the rest because they were confidential, and that, of course, leaking such calls is absolutely unacceptable. Ushakov said some of his conversations were conducted on encrypted government channels, but suggested the calls with Dmitriev and Witkoff may have been made over WhatsApp, which is a big mistake there. There are certain conversations on WhatsApp that, generally speaking, someone might be able to listen to. The content of the calls provide proof of what many already suspected about Witkoff's closeness to the Russian position. The question of who took the highly unusual step of leaking such sensitive audio to a news agency is more complicated. It's really hard to speculate. It could be 100 million different things, including somebody on the Russian side trying to hurt Witkoff's reputation, says CIA Moscow former chief Daniel Hoffman. Now, they blame Russia here, but there's also another big motive here. They say it could have been someone likely within the U.S. system, so someone within U.S. intelligence who was privy to the calls and could have easily tapped them. There's also the idea that this could have been Europe, right? Because European intelligence, here we go. Another official suggested a European intelligence service horrified at Witkoff's pro-Russian position was most likely behind this leak. So it could have been from the U.S. side. It could have been the European side. Many believe because of Europe's absolute hostility to any talks with Russia that are on the basis of any terms that Russia will accept. and that formulate any kind of alignment with the Russian side has spurred this. So there you have it. You have literally potentially U.S. intel, European intel, maybe a combination of both leaking out to the public, not just the plan, because you had what was likely Keith Kellogg's people leak out the first initial 28 points to Axios. And then you have the call that Witkoff made with prominent Russian officials that show coaching when this is diplomacy, right? They're trying to get something done. All of this, however, without any verification and validation, could very well just be a ruse to get us thinking that there's a major conflict here, when indeed sabotage may always be the ploy. Because how I see it is that the Trump administration, given that it keeps hammering down on points that Russia will never accept, is more interested in the veneer of talking to Russia rather than getting a deal, and also perhaps is more interested in getting the monkey off his back, in the sense that if this war continues and if the conflict ends, which it will inevitably in Russian victory, then Trump will have been seen as the failure. Trump right now, I believe, is trying to say, I'm not the failure here. I tried everything I could. And look at what's happened. In Europe, the intelligence services, they're all doing him a huge favor in the sense of torpedoing this deal so that it looks exactly like that. At least that's my assessment, but I could be horribly wrong about this. But of course, there's been gloating happening about this. It's absolutely, it's absolutely a joke. Look at the Telegraph here. Witkoff leaks throw entire peace talks into doubt. U.S. President's special envoy demonstrated a lack of experience after a Kremlin leak call revealed him coaching top aide Putin. I mean, this is the kind of narrative that's coming out. The problem here to them, which makes them a very suspicious, honestly, very suspicious in this, is that you have literal anonymous officials, likely MI6, likely other European intelligence agencies. The CIA is up in there because CIA is up on everything that's happening with Ukraine. There's obviously prominent forces in all of these agencies that work closely with the media, Operation Mockingbird, everyone, work closely with the media to spin this as Trump is pro-Russia and his people are so pro-Russia that they're coaching Russia as to how to get into Donald Trump's good graces so Russia can control Trump. That's actually that's such a ridiculous assertion, given that the United States is very committed to points, for example, the points about Russian assets, the points about not giving complete recognition of the constitutionalized and federalized republics and territories of Zaporozhye, Kherson, etc., to Russia. All these points that are sticking points. 600,000 Ukrainian troops, right? This plan was an absolute joke, and it's being framed as a Russian plan. This is the pinnacle and peak of what it means for the warmongering class, the political establishment, which the Trump administration is a part of, how they have created an environment of chaos which allows for all kinds of possibilities to delay and distort and absolutely prevent any kind of settlement to this conflict that is realistic. But the problem, again, with all of this, there's a major problem that the Trump administration is running into. And to be quite honest, it is not just the fact that there are major leaks happening, that the Trump administration can't even conduct talks like this without major sabotage from within his own damn administration. No, it's worse than that. It's the fact that what is being argued about, what is being targeted as pro-Russia is not pro-Russia at all. It absolutely isn't. Vladimir Putin said it himself. We will talk about these points, but there was no agreement on anything. And mind you, there will be very little agreement on major points that will make the deal itself a non-starter. So all of this is very politically convenient, of course, because Ukraine is completely and utterly crumbling. This war is effectively finished. Really, all that's happening is that Ukraine's carcass is being dragged about and being thrown at Russia over and over again as Russia wages this war of attrition. Driscoll also said that Russia's military advances, its military-industrial complex, is scaring and frightening the bejesus out of both the U.S. military and its European counterparts because of its missile advancements. I mean, we know this from what we've covered here: the Berevesnik, the Oreshnik, the Kinjal, all of these missiles with hypersonic speeds, a few of them with nuclear power capabilities, a few of them with a payload that's just as devastating as a nuclear bomb without the nuclear catastrophe component to it. ICBMs, I mean, these missiles, which are becoming faster and stronger and more devastating than anything in the U.S.'s arsenal, which is outdated and aging and not keeping up pace because of its for-profit character. This is also scaring them. It's Russia's prominence and rise that is causing all of this panic. Europe can't handle it because Europe has essentially what it's done is it's gambled everything politically and economically on trying to punish Russia, trying to weaken Russia. A lot of this is because the corporations, the monopolies that control those governments there, they want to see a kind of US style model be applied in Europe. They want to get rid of everything that people need, everything that people have, and they want to sell it to all the warmongers and the banks. And Russia provides a very convenient excuse to do all of this. In the United States, there's a similar phenomenon. And it just so happens that Donald Trump's administration was elected in large part because there was a good portion of the population that is tired of this. And the Trump administration said that he would, quote unquote, end this. But it was never about ending it for good. It was never about peace. It was about what was absolutely required, which is a pause, a freeze, stop the conflict where it is so the U.S. can regroup and get Ukraine to regroup, and hell, maybe Moldova, maybe some Transnistria, maybe some Kaliningrad. You know that there was the U.S. general working for NATO who said, well, we can wipe out Kaliningrad. Donahue, his name was. You have all of these plans that the United States has to contain Russia that need to be recalibrated. Ukraine is becoming an absolute quagmire, one that is likely to sink the U.S. empire if it keeps going. It'll continue to sink its legitimacy. The economic sanctions will continue to blow back on its Western partners. And the United States, while being very fine, its political class fine with the condition of Europe, it won't be fine with the total consequences, and it's not fine with the total consequences of this conflict, which is Russia getting stronger and the Western world, the collective West, which is supposed to be the battering ram of U.S. empire, getting weaker. That is not what it wants. Even this whole act by the Trump administration, from Pete Hegseth to Trump himself, slapping around Europe, that's not because the United States wants Europe to be quote unquote weak. It wants Europe to be strong enough to be able to do its bidding for it. Right now, Europe is not strong enough to do any of that. What do you hear from Trump all the time? From Besant, Europe doesn't pay enough. Europe doesn't do enough sanctions. Russia doesn't do enough this and that. Well, damn, Europe can't. Europe doesn't have a military presence anywhere near the United States. Europe doesn't have the influence that the U.S. does. It's a junior partner to the U.S. It is its dog, right? And you're going to have to train that dog to attack. You're going to have to make that dog stronger in order to get what you want. But the United States can't do that. So the United States has to settle for punishing Europe but the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, is making the U.S. weaker. It's making it look worse in the world. It is making Russia more powerful militarily, which therefore means that the stagnant U.S. military industrial complex, one that is completely dependent upon shareholders and executives just running away with the most amount of money while making the least amount at the cheapest cost. All of that is creating what? chickens coming home to roost scenario where the Ukraine conflict and the war on Russia will become a huge domestic problem economically and especially politically. So the Trump administration is in a complete disaster moment. This is not the place where the Trump administration wants to be. It wants to look strong, but there's leaks everywhere. Europe is out of control in many ways, in the sense that it will align with everything that the U.S. wants, but then play this role of a confrontational ally with the United States that goes way too far, to the point where the Guardian itself is saying, its sources are saying to that European intelligence is behind these leaks to torpedo what already is a absolutely crap plan, literally a crap plan. You could wipe your you know what with it. That's how bad this plan actually is. But it just so happens that this plan is slightly better than anything we've ever seen the US come out with. This is the game, everybody. This is the game. The game is to create this illusion of conflict internally in order to ensure that the disaster outcome that we can expect, the likelihood of the continuation of war, is acceptable. And the consequences to that can then be blamed on the appropriate scapegoat, Europe, Ukraine, Zelensky, right? We see it everywhere with the United States. Oh, it's Zelensky's fault. Remember, you had that whole White House scene, Zelensky come in to beg for his weapons and his patriots and his money, and Trump saying, no, bad boy, and slapping him around like an abusive dog handler, right? And now we're seeing it again. The Trump administration is to say, yeah, Europe didn't want it. Oh, Ukraine didn't want it. And then when Russia finally talks to the Trump administration and says, these points, we're not going to be able to accept this. And the Trump administration says, well, Europe and Ukraine isn't going to accept what you want. Then Trump is going to say, what does he always say? Goes on the phone, goes to the presser, on the jet, flying back to the United States. He says, I'm so disappointed in Putin. I'm so disappointed. We're going to do sanctions. And it's this cycle over and over and over again until until the Trump administration is at a point where it can step back, and say, oh, yeah, we can wash our hands of this. But they'll never be able to do that. The United States can't, because the CIA is all up in Ukraine. The United States can't stop giving support to Ukraine without it collapsing. So it has to rewrite how that's done. Give weapons to NATO, which is the United States. NATO gives them to Ukraine. The United States can't get out of this unless it accepts Russia's terms. And now, if we really want to know who finds these terms unacceptable, it's not just the Europeans. Russia's played along with that narrative in order to forward talks, likely for normalization and other reasons, which I completely understand. But the reality from the U.S. perspective, if we have an independent U.S. perspective, it should be, it's the U.S. It's the U.S. elite, it's the neocons, it's the political establishment, it's the military brass, it's the intelligence agencies, it's all of these components of the establishment which absolutely cannot accept Russia's terms, because Russia's terms are victory. Russia's terms are Russia gets stronger. Russia prevents a real threat on its border. Russia prevents NATO expansion. Russia prevents the actual dangerous war between Europe and Russia that Russia doesn't want to see. Vladimir Putin said it himself. I am ready to put into writing that Russia will never attack Europe. Because why? Russia's never wanted to attack Europe. What would that do for Russia? Russia's already at war with NATO. Doesn't need to attack NATO countries. It has its own war to resolve on its border directly. So Russia's in the driver's seat here. When this conflict finally ends in the logical conclusion of Russian victory, it's going to be a massive turning point, as this conflict has already been in the realm of world development, relations, the rise of a multipolar world. It's a shock. It already is, but it's going to be even more of a shockwave to the collective West that its empire, that the empire led by the United States, is not only on the back footing, not only declining, but really viewing the end game, really coming up against the end game here, which is that the US is going to, every time I go to China, this is what people who are prominent figures in academia, who are prominent figures at think tanks, who conduct, who study, who cooperate with, who talk with Chinese officials. What do they always say? You can hear them. The United States is going to have to be a normal country. It's going to have to be just another country. But its system does not allow it to do that. Its system says it can't be a normal country. It has to be exceptional. It has to be number one. It has to seek, destroy. It has to dominate. It has to completely run the entire world, financially, militarily, politically, in order to enrich the monopolies, the banks, the cartels, and of course, all of those who find comfortable careers doing their bidding. So that is who can't accept Russia's terms, because if they do, hell, that's a whole lot of market share you're giving up, right? What do they always say? Russia's this big gas station. Oh, they don't just say that to demean Russia. They say it because they are aware that Russia is sitting very pretty on a lot of wealth that a lot of the world wants. And if the world ends up trading with Russia in a very big way around this, and Russia says, oh, maybe we can get even stronger, maybe we can develop even more, then you have a big problem for the United States, which is the U.S. can't dominate the global economy anymore. The United States won't be the dominant force in the global economy anymore. It's already seeing the writing on the wall militarily. This is the end game it cannot have. So they're going to keep pushing these farcical peace plans, and then they're going to tell you all that there is this big chaos and crisis around it in order for it to predictably fail. And that's the Trump administration's nightmare right there out for all of you to see. It's a nightmare of incompetence and effectiveness, but really what it is, it's the nightmare of the end of the U.S. empire as we know it. And there's the sirens to tell you that this is a big emergency for them, a huge emergency for them. The elites can't handle this, and they're going to keep finding ways to manipulate and to destroy any attempt to bring this conflict to where it was always going to go, Russia's victory.